Welcome to Going Underground with me, Afshin Rattansi. 3 times a week, we're bringing you the stories that really matter in the United Kingdom as we delve past the mainstream headlines. In today's show, can we trust Labour? Tottenham MP Dave Lammy may be setting out to challenge Boris as London mayor, but will Blair and Brown's legacies of deregulation and illegal wars drag his bid down? Plus, silencing the already voiceless, the new law that will stop charitable campaigning, and a cold, super high-pressure way of calming down those against austerity. For these stories and more, let's go underground. But we start with Edward Snowden, who revealed that perhaps everything we communicate in Britain is bugged by the United States. So what does our Prime Minister think of the man currently being targeted by the CIA, MI6, Special Branch, and GCHQ?
I don't think Snowden's had an enormous public impact.
What? The revelation that every phone call, every email, every text, every web page we look at, every online game we play is being monitored by the CIA hasn't made much impact? Come on, it must have made some impact on the public, Mr. Cameron.
My sense is that the public reaction, as opposed to some of the media reaction, is, look, we have intelligence and security services because it's a dangerous world and there are bad people who want to do terrible things to us, and we should support these intelligence services and the work they do. And I think the public reaction, what I've felt in terms of what people's reaction has been pretty robust.
Robust? Well, Cameron was certainly robust about telling his heavies to smash up the Guardian newspaper's computers in their offices and detaining a journalist's boyfriend without charge at a London airport. President Obama got his advice from his National Intelligence Director, who we now know lied to Congress. Where does Cameron get his advice from when it comes to dealing with the Snowden revelations?
I love watching, as I probably should stop telling people, crime dramas on the television. There's hardly a crime drama where a crime is solved without using the data of a mobile communications device.
I see. So Cameron bases his views on Snowden and surveillance and GCHQ on crime dramas on television. And it's after watching these well-researched programs, he's decided to renew his calls for more mass data collection. So we can look forward to economic policy being decided on the outcome of Dragon's Den, NHS policy on casualty, urban policy on EastEnders, and as for Afghanistan, maybe Dad's army. And as for the general election, maybe we can all text in our votes, X Factor style. Ed Miliband thinks that he can win the next election, and recent polls show that his party is still in the lead. But official unemployment is down to 7.1%, and this week's GDP figures show that the UK is one of the fastest growing economies in Europe. Disparity of wealth is, of course, the ongoing issue, though, and Labour is trying to capitalise on it, with Ed Ball's latest proposal to raise the top rate of tax. But will it be enough to repair the damage done to people's trust in the Labour Party after Blair and Brown? One former Labour minister, tipped to be the party's London mayoral candidate, is confident that he will be able to gain the support of the great British public. With me is David Lammy, MP for Tottenham. Welcome, David.
Thank you.
Let's begin with a theme you've been talking about recently as the government talks about how wonderful the economy is going. A tale of two cities. Nothing to do with guillotines in Paris.
No, but I think anyone who's visited London in the last while or lives in London understands that on the one hand, yes, we've got a boom in London. Yes, we've got people all over the world that want to come and live here. But on the other hand, we have a massive housing crisis. Young people sat at home in their parents' homes, unable to get on the housing ladder. Unemployment is not falling in areas like the one I represent in Tottenham here in London. There's a lot of hardship. You're beginning to see it on the streets, with people homeless on the streets in the way that you see in the 1980s.
How do you see it personally in Tottenham, in your constituency?
Look, I think in Tottenham it's at the epicentre of the crisis that we've got in this country. We have a withdrawal of many of the benefits and welfare that support the most vulnerable people. And what that means is that there are families, often 3, 4 kids run with a single mother at the helm, really, really struggling and having to look and face eviction. We have people really worried about the bedroom tax, which means also that they have to downsize, move out of their properties. Unemployment is high in Tottenham. You know, it was high shortly before the riots 2.5 years ago that begun in my constituency. It really hasn't fallen significantly since then, even though, yes, I know people are picking up part-time jobs in other parts of the country.
Well, let's get to the riots in a second, but I know you all have heard it in Parliament quite often, the government continually saying Labour has something to do with it. You had quite a ministerial career in the Labour government. Do you think Labour has anything to do with it, has anything to blame for the issues you're talking about?
I do not think that in Labour in office dealt sufficiently with housing. That has become a bigger issue, and indeed in London here, the mayor is not building enough housing, and that is leading to a major crisis. Unemployment, no, I don't think that that can be laid at Labour's door. I do think it is catastrophic for an economy if young people are sitting at home and don't get into the habit of work. I think it was a mistake for the government to cut the Future Jobs Fund, which really handicapped our ability to see young people begin to flourish even in a downturn economy.
I don't want to sound like I'm Boris Johnson, but don't you think, I mean, you were skills minister when you voted for this 10p rate of tax being abolished, really hurting the poorest in society. I mean, why did you do that?
Well, that was now 5 years ago. The economy was what it was then. That was before an economic downturn. I remember Gordon Brown felt at the time that the Labour Party could do that. But he said it was a mistake. I'm happy to accept it was a mistake.
Why were you able to do that?
Well, I was...
You obviously care passionately about the disparity of wealth in this capital city.
I don't think anyone was arguing at that time that there was a significant housing crisis affecting my constituents. There was a significant unemployment situation. So you vote on the basis of the economy as it stands today.
So you think there is an issue of trust, though, still there, as the Conservatives and Liberal Democrats continually have it against the Labour Party?
I'm always really reluctant to reduce this to a ding-dong between the Conservatives and the Labour. I understand the way you're framing your questions.
No, it's very specifically on policy, that if the Labour Party, when in office, deliberately try to hurt the poorest using that particular tax issue, how can they be trusted to help the poor get any better under a, who knows, a David Lammy mayoralty?
Well, the first thing is, I don't accept the premise that the Labour Party in office deliberately set out to hurt the poorest. I can't accept that premise. I don't recognise that, and I don't think many of your viewers will recognise that. And of course, it's not for me to speak for the Labour Party. I am not Ed Miliband. I'm not currently in his shadow team. It is for me, however, as a prominent London MP, as someone who takes a deep interest in London issues, to set out things as I see them in my constituency at the moment. And you can see those things today. And there are a suite of things that need to happen in our country if that is to change. And I think the most significant thing within that is, of course, subsidising employment to ensure that young people aren't sitting at home, is dealing with a housing crisis that affects all Londoners, and we should be very, very concerned about. Of course, it affects other parts of the country as well, particularly in the southeast, and an economy that's seeing one group of people benefit, particularly if you've got a mortgage, interest rates are low, but another group of people, particularly if you're in the private rented sector, or indeed if you're in social housing, really struggling at this time.
Well, London also was the scene, of course, of the biggest demonstration it ever saw against the Iraq War. So again, on this trust issue, you voted very strongly for the Iraq War. Do you not see that there are problems with Labour candidates nationally in terms of a general election as regards trust when it comes to the British people?
Well, I mean, I think a lot has been said about the Iraq War.
Well, you voted for it.
Do you want me to answer? A lot has been said about the Iraq War. Certainly I can speak for myself. At the time, I had in my constituency, and I still do, the largest Kurdish population of people in the country. And actually many of those Kurds, many of whom came here fleeing asylum, came here fleeing Saddam Hussein. So that's why I voted. But of course, many people, looking back on that period, looking back on the evidence, the dossier, the nature of the inquiries, regret that decision. And I too look back, and that's why I took the stand in Syria. You've
also talked a lot about ethnic minorities and prejudice against them in British society. Runnymede Trust latest report, 4 out of 5 believe the coverage of ethnic minorities promotes racism. Do you agree with that? Do you think the media is racist in this country?
I think that we have to do a lot in Britain to ensure that not just the media, but the world of politics, the world of business reflects our country. If in the end you have significant minority populations that aren't succeeding breaking through those glass ceilings in the editorial rooms of our journalistic departments, then of course you will see prejudices and discrimination creep in. So there is work for the media to do, but there's work for politicians to do, there's work for business to do, to see that whatever your background, you can succeed and flourish in this country.
What about the police?
Actually, I've spent a lot of time with the Met in the last few weeks and months, particularly frontline officers, and actually the overwhelming amount of officers that I meet, I think, are fantastic and doing a great job. And indeed, locally, I find officers doing a great job. However, there is a significant minority of officers, I think, who still mess up, who still have beliefs that are not consistent with a democratic country, and it's the inquiry into them, it's the Independent Police Complaints Commission that I think is particularly problematic in our country when things go wrong. And if you've got, as you have to in Britain now, a senior Conservative cabinet minister raising concerns about parts of the Metropolitan Police because of cover-up, if you've had hacking and some of the issues we've seen there, if, as you see in my constituency, concerns emanating from the Mark Duggan case, that is a moment to say, not to condemn the Met entirely at all, that would not be fair, but to say we have to have a system when things go wrong, that we look into it properly and the public can have confidence in the system.
Yeah, I never thought we'd see a Tory minister complaining about the police that way. The Black Police Officers Association does say that they still feel that the police is institutionally racist. There are people there who've said that, police officers. So what do you think?
Well, I mean, I think that the Black Police Association has a long history of grievance in relation to officers starting as a constable and managing not to make it up the ranks beyond sergeant to inspector and to being a Met inspector. So look, this is an institution that's got a lot to do, and I have to say, we have 32,000 officers here in London, and only 868 of them are black. That is a problem.
But, so do you think Mark Duggan was killed because the police are racist?
No, I think that we have to accept the jury's conclusions. They concluded that he died lawfully, and the issue for Mark Duggan is whether or not he was holding a gun. The jury, of course, found that he was not holding a gun at the time he was shot. That is controversial. His lawyers are looking at it. The inquest was the first step. We have to still wait for the Independent Police Complaints Commission report and what they say. They say that they are actually looking again at some of what was said by the police, so we wait to see. But this is a very difficult time, of course, for Mark Duggan's family, as you would expect. And no doubt about it, relations took a setback, particularly relations with the police.
David Lammy, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Are we nearing a militarized police state? The government can't seem to make up its mind. It's not often Home Secretary Theresa May seems to take the side of the people, but she has rejected a request for the government to begin procuring water cannon for use against the public. While she did signal that water cannon could appear on the streets of Britain following the student riots, May has now refused to approve government funding for them, meaning the money will have to come from somewhere else. Even London Mayor Boris Johnson, who stated in a letter on the 6th of January that he was convinced of the value of having water cannon available to the Metropolitan Police Service, admitted to the London Assembly on Wednesday that it would not have made a blind bit of difference during the London riots. A formal decision on the possible deployment of water cannon is expected later this month, with police hoping they will be available by summer. The Department for Work and Pensions may not have access to water cannon, but they do have access to machine guns. At a select committee meeting held in December, a number of disabled people found themselves confronted by police aiming machine guns at them. Disabled People Against Cuts complains that even if the government wants to deploy machine guns against them, surely it would be better if they were pointed at the floor rather than at the faces of people with disabilities. Mind you, with machine guns in use, who needs water cannon? Coming up after the break, why an angry bird is more important than Chancellor Angela Merkel, and why the Prime Minister thinks Ed Miliband is George Clooney, to Ed Ball's Sandra Bullock. Strike action at the moment doesn't worry David Cameron too much. Given his performance at Prime Minister's Questions this week, he's more worried about strike action in the 1980s.
But I have to say, I think if anyone needs to make an apology for their role in the miners' strike, it should be Arthur Scargill for the appalling way that he led that union. And I think while we're at it, if other people want to ask about their roles, there was the role of the leader of the Labour Party, who at the time never condemned the fact they wouldn't hold a ballot. So I think there are lessons for Labour to learn, and judging from their performance today, they haven't learned any of them.
The Labour leader had somewhat bizarrely been plugging away at trying to get the Prime Minister to accept his latest policy of supporting a 50p tax rate on the rich.
Can I ask the Prime Minister, who said this just before the election, and I quote, "Showing that we're all in this together means showing that the rich will pay their share, which is why the 50p tax rate will have to stay."
The fact is, under this...
The question has been asked. The answer must be heard. Prime Minister.
Cameron replied by becoming the Bullingdon crypto-socialist.
Under this government, the richest will pay more in income tax in every year than any year when he was in office. That is the truth. I want the richest to pay more in tax.
But one question from Labour's MP for Corby, Andy Sawford, had the Tories reaching for water.
Can I invite the Prime Minister to visit my constituency of Corby in East Northamptonshire to spend a day working with a rogue employment agency on a 0-hours contract and being paid sometimes less than the minimum wage?
Watch Home Secretary Theresa May in response.
I can assure the honourable gentleman I will be visiting his constituency in the next 16 months.
Let's see that again. Does Theresa May know something about 0-hours contracts that the Prime Minister doesn't? But Ed Miliband was still convinced that Cameron not only agreed with his policy of a 50p top rate of tax, and that the Tories were about to lower it to 40p.
Does he rule out, and the Chancellor, just keep quiet for a sec, does he rule out giving another tax cut to the richest in society by cutting the top rate to 40p? To 40p. To 40p. Calm down. To 40p. Yes or no?
David Cameron continued to tell Miliband he wanted to help the poor.
There's so much good news, I can't wait to get up and tell it.
And as for anyone threatening Cameron's equitable Britain, the Tories' Alex Shelbrooke from Elmerton Rothwell had a question.
Last year, the government successfully deported the radical cleric Abu Qatada. The new immigration bill will crack down on illegal immigrants and eager to deport foreign criminals.
Abu Qatada was successfully deported. I thought he flew to Jordan of his own accord after taxpayers forked out millions of pounds in pointless legal fees. Anyway, Cameron was then asked about the immigration status of Ed Miliband's American political campaigning guru, Arnie Graf.
I can, but obviously I'm sure I shouldn't comment on this case that is now, I think, being investigated. No, don't tempt me.
Tempt him into deporting Miliband's newest recruit? Well, he was tempted to mention a TV diving show in response to this question about shipbuilding from Tory MP for Portsmouth North, Penny Mordaunt, apparently ranked the sexiest female parliamentarian.
Would the Prime Minister agree with me that Portsmouth would be an excellent place to build those ships?
Well, first of all, can I congratulate the Honourable Lady for everything she's done in recent weeks to highlight the importance of Portsmouth and all matters maritime in the broadest sense of the word.
Maritime? That's the Prime Minister obliquely referencing ITV's Saturday evening diving competition show, Splash, which features the Portsmouth MP. Not that Cameron wasn't referring to a lot of audio-visual entertainment this week. He even got a mention of an Oscar-nominated George Clooney and Sandra Bullock film. Here he is talking about what Ed Miliband and Shadow Chancellor Ed Balls remind him of.
They remind me, those two. I don't know whether you've seen the film Gravity, but they rather remind me of two people who stepped out into a void with absolutely no idea what to do next. It is, like the great film, a tragedy made right here in Britain.
How does Cameron get the time to watch so many films and TV shows? It took just one vote to sway the House of Lords this week in favour of the government's lobbying bill, potentially in breach of Articles 8 and 11 of the European Convention on Human Rights. Many charities accuse the government of trying to enshrine a gagging law that will prevent them from lobbying MPs. The law is opposed by a spectrum of NGOs, from the Countryside Alliance to the Salvation Army to Oxfam. Those smaller charities are exempt. Other campaign groups, like 38 Degrees, are dismayed by the fast-tracking of the legislation, which will cap the spending of charities on trying to persuade our elected representatives in favour of one cause or another. With me is Becky Jarvis from 38 Degrees. Welcome, Becky. Let's start with what 38 Degrees is.
38 Degrees is a UK campaigning organisation. We have 2.2 million members, and we campaign on the issues that 38 Degrees members decide on. So we've campaigned to protect the NHS from privatisation. A few years ago, we stopped the government selling off our forests. And also we've campaigned on stopping Rupert Murdoch taking over BSkyB.
And so basically it's a lobby group. I mean, you say campaigning group, but it's a lobbying group, really.
Well, a campaign, I think, is something that people recognise.
But so, should you have undue influence over our democratically elected MPs?
Well, I mean, 38 Degrees exists to give power to people to campaign on issues that they care about.
But you do agree that it is wrong for big multinational corporations to have undue influence on our MPs?
Well, I think one of the real sadnesses about the gagging law is that it stops ordinary people from having a voice, but it does nothing to stop Shell or Tesco from lobbying about and having influence over politicians. I think that's really sad. And I think I've been across the country talking to about 38 Degrees members about why they want to stop the gagging law, and that's one of the things that they tell me is that they want to tackle corporate lobbying, but the government's doing absolutely nothing to take the big money out of politics. What they're doing, if the government were really sincere about taking the big money out of politics, they wouldn't start with the Women's Institute or Oxfam. They would start with Lord Ashcroft or Lord Sainsbury or Lord Sykes. The gagging law will introduce caps to what you can spend per constituency. So at the moment, any organisation can spend, so 38 Degrees, for example, could spend £1 million in one constituency. Now, that's probably a bit silly, and that probably should be capped. But the government have gone too far. Now what you'll be capped to spend is just under £10,000 in a whole year before an election.
For a constituency. For
a constituency. And now what included in the amount of money you can spend is stuff like staff costs.
Reaches between £10,000 and £20,000 a year. £10,000 to £20,000 just for that campaign.
Absolutely. And so you can imagine what a massive impact that would have on campaigning on issues that people care about the whole year before an election.
So 38 Degrees has been successful about human trafficking, fracking, anti-zero hour contracts. Are you saying that organisations have to have that kind of cash to really get any influence in a constituency about a particular issue?
Well, I think that once...
And then the whole of democracy is kind of ruined, isn't it?
Well, I think once... I mean, certainly 38 Degrees is essence about people power. And that's what's important. It's about lots of people coming together to campaign about the things that they care about.
I mean, won't the bill stop Monsanto, for instance, from putting adverts all over one constituency saying GMO food is fantastic? It will stop Monsanto.
I think
or Shell over shale gas.
I think that no, because what you're comparing it to is big corporate lobbying, and organisations like Shell, they don't use like the Women's Institute as a front to do their campaigning. they campaign through very, very different routes. And I think that those are two very opposing ways of working. I think that at its heart of it, this gagging law will have an absolutely awful effect on democracy and freedom of speech.
On the big charities.
No, we're not a big charity. We're a not-for-profit organisation, and it's not just the big charities that have come out against this legislation. One of the amazing things is it's united so many different kinds of organisations and members of the public. One of the other impacts of this legislation is that it'll have a chilling effect on the sector, because people will just be small charities as well as big organisations, as well as organisations like 38 Degrees and local community groups will just be terrified of campaigning on issues because they're so worried about breaking the law.
I mean, David Cameron is obsessed by charity. It's part of his big society thing. Why do you think it's under his stewardship that they want a law like this?
Your guess is as good as mine, but there are lots of rumours. The government do say that this is about taking the big money out of politics, but as I said, if the government were really wanted to tackle the big money in politics, they would not start with the Women's Institute. They would start with Lord Ashcroft.
Okay, so there is this massive alliance, and yet the government's response seems to be trying to fast-track it.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. It's certainly been sped through the legislative process. It had no consultation, had no pre-legislative scrutiny. It's certainly been the quickest bill campaign that I've been involved in.
Well, thank you, Becky Jarvis.
Thanks.
When news first broke of massive data collection by the NSA and GCHQ, most of the British media were less than interested. Collecting information from your emails and phone calls in the name of national security was apparently fine and dandy. But the latest set of revelations has caused even our favorite mainstream channels to sit up and take notice, because data has also apparently been collected through apps like Angry Birds. Yes, the wildly popular game where you shoot pigs with colourful birds even merited a headline on both the BBC and Sky earlier this week. It seems Snowden's finally found what makes the British public tick. It's fine to spy on all of us, but Angry Birds are sacred. Join us next time as we go underground to bring you the latest beneath the mainstream from around the UK. Don't forget, you can drop us a line on Twitter at underground_RT, like our page on Facebook, or email us goingunderground@rttv.co.uk. See you on Monday.